Welcome to Transformative Principal, where you learn how to be a leader and not just a manager of a to-do list. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can find me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Your to-do list is a hungry monster that is never satisfied. For the last year and a half, I've helped principals get awards, get promoted, and find the time to do the work that really matters. I recently opened a new mastermind slot. Schedule a call with me and let's overcome the stressed and isolated principal position together. Go to the show notes for this episode at transformativeprincipal.org and click Schedule a Call with Jethro. Hey, thanks so much for listening to Transformative Principal. This is episode 304 with TJ Vari and Joe Jones, and I hope that you enjoy this interview. Before we get there, though, I do want to remind you that the fall listener survey is still open, but I'm going to close it up this week. So if you have not taken the fall survey, please do that. You can go to transformativeprincipal.org/survey and you can access it there. And I would really appreciate your feedback. And most importantly, I want more guests. So if you can recommend a principal who's doing something amazing, I would love to interview them and share the story of what they're doing, because you and I both know that a principal up the street from you is doing a rocking job, and their experience and what they're doing needs to be shared. So take that survey at transformativeprincipal.org/survey. And thanks so much for listening. Here's my interview with TJ and Joe. Welcome to Transformative Principal. I am excited to have on the podcast today two superstars, TJ Vari and Joe Jones. TJ is the assistant superintendent of Apo School District, and Joseph Jones is the superintendent of Newcastle County Votech School District. And Joe and TJ, welcome to the program. Excited to have you guys.
It's awesome. It's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Jethro. Very excited about this.
Yeah, so I am excited to talk to you guys about your new book that just came out, Candid and Compassionate Feedback. And I've talked with a lot of people about giving feedback, doing observations, and things like that. So I think most people understand why it's important to give feedback. But what I appreciate about your book are a couple things. Number one, addressing head-on this issue of culture of nice and how that's detrimental to our schools. Can you talk a little bit about the culture of nice and how that holds us back?
Sure thing. I'll tackle that one first, Jethro. I think the culture of nice is just established in places where we have a fear of offending people. And the result of that is often that the environment ends up being offensive anyway. So, for example, one thing that we hear leaders do in a culture of nice is to ask questions to get people to understand something that they might need to improve. And the tactic itself ends up kind of baiting people down the line and offending people anyway. So we kind of switch that and say that's not the place for professional dialogue. It's more of a place for candid feedback and helping people to improve. And so we end up with this culture of nice on the inside of schools because everybody wants to be nice to one another for fear of offending each other, and then B, that lack of candor can actually be exactly what people are offended by in the long run anyway. And so we've learned, Joe and I, through our research and just through our own evidence as principals and school leaders, that being direct and confronting reality is actually what builds trust. So there's this old adage that you have to go in and build trust and build a relationship and get to know somebody and then confront their reality and confront the reality of what's happening in classrooms. And that's just not how trust is built. It might seem counterintuitive, but we have to break down that culture of nice if we're really going to have trusting relationships where people can be candid with one another. And I'll just tack one more thing onto that to say that in a culture that breaks out of what we call the circle of nice, the candor is actually what is compassionate towards one another, where we're helping each other and we're pointing out places where people are doing great work, and we're pointing out places where people need to add a layer or tweak something to make something a little bit better with a little more precision, all for the sake of the kids. And so we're plagued by a culture of nice in schools, and one thing that we really want to see is that schools work on their issues from the inside out, rather than letting some of these other entities permeate a school when we're not doing so well. So I'm sure Joe can add something to that. But that's what we're talking about when we talk about that trapped in a circle of nice.
Yeah, thank you, TJ. Spot on. The piece I would add is candor is not rude. And we really want to be clear that we're not talking about suddenly being rude with people, being, overly direct, calling them out. We're in a world in which things like care, empathy, altruism is very much needed. In education, we find a lot of spots for that. What we're talking about is turning the corner so your empathy is backed with very concrete evidence also on how to improve. And we found that, people do resonate with that level of candor as long as you're consistent. We find that a lot of people will start to rebel against it when they see inconsistency and trust begins to erode. But if you're consistent, you're wrapped around your core values, you're always heading in that direction, and that's how your candor is aligned. Usually we're not only seeing results, but we're also getting people to improve as professionals, the teachers and ourselves, which is at the end of the day, all what we want for the betterment of kids. So yeah, I would just add that little piece.
Mm-hmm. So I got a couple things that I took away from that. If you are like going to be nice, and then once you build a relationship, then you can be honest with people. The problem with that is that once you spend all that time being nice, even though you know that there are things you need to say to help them improve, you then can't be candid, because then you will come across as being rude, because you've been in my classroom 50 times and only now are you saying that there's a problem? What about those other 50 times? Oh, you've been seeing it this whole time and you just never told me? That's not helpful or supportive to people at all. And then the other thing is there's this idea of sanctioned incompetence where people are doing things poorly, and because you're being nice and trying not to offend anybody, you're just allowing those negative behaviors to continue, when really you need to have a candid, clear conversation about how to fix it. And I think what you said, Joe, about having your empathy backed with concrete evidence is really, really powerful, because then you're not just saying, hey, I'm a jerk and I'm going to put you in your place. You're actually saying, hey, I'm sorry that you're struggling with this and this is hard, but here's all the times where you've had these issues. And now I have an idea of how to help you overcome this so that you're not in this position where, people are thinking this about you without you being able to do anything about it. Is that a fair interpretation of what those conversations could look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's spot on, Jethro. I mean, that's precisely what gets people trapped in a culture of nice. And what happens is people are actually given that type of advice when they go into a school.
Yeah.
And we see such turnover with school leaders. And so you get a leader for 2, 3, 4 years, at best, in some cases, in some schools, in some systems. And we're telling people from the start that their job is to build the culture and create relationships and try to be empathetic and sympathetic to people's environments, and all of that is good, but it doesn't work unless we're also going to use candor to confront reality, to ask critical questions, to be in the most important spaces in our schools, which is the classroom, and to do that frequently. And I think that type of direct, sincere, accurate feedback, that's what we're talking about. And doing that from the start is what school improvement is all about. So, I mean, one thing we've couched with the book is that it should be candid and compassionate conversations, but folks know in schools the word feedback a little bit more. But we couch this not just in the feedback that you give to teachers in their classroom, but also PLC conversations, leadership team conversations, how you grow your teacher leaders. If we're not candid from the get-go, we will not build trust. And you're spot on. Then when we go and say we're having an issue with something, then it becomes a surprise. That's not a surprise is not what builds trust with people.
No.
It's when we talk the talk and walk the walk.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a story where I think that this has happened. And I had a teacher who I went into her classroom, and she was an older person, but new teacher. And my relationship with her was totally different than most of the other teachers because she had been in business before. And I went in and did my observation, and I said, I was candid about her performance and what she was missing and how it didn't align to our school goals. And honestly, I was nervous. This was only my second year being an administrator, and I didn't know exactly how to do it, but I knew that she was doing it wrong and needed to do better. And it was obvious. And so one of the things we were working on was asking questions, and asking questions that were not yes or no questions. And so this is like totally simple, silly kind of stuff. But I said in that observation, almost all of your questions were yes or no questions. And the kids did not have to show that they were thinking, and they had a 50% chance to get it right, no matter what it was. And when they got it wrong, you didn't ask them why. You just said, nope, that's wrong, and went on. And she was like, okay, great. Thank you. What do I need to do to fix it? And so I went through the professional development that we had done the previous year that she wasn't there for. And I said, these are some of the things that you can do. She said, great, I'm going to implement that tomorrow. Come back tomorrow and you can see it. And I was like, what? But okay. So I went back, I saw her implement it right away. And that was the beginning of this really powerful relationship where I came in, was candid and honest with her about what she was doing. And she was eager to learn and change and grow. And she identified that culture of nice. She was the first one that identified it for me and said, nobody else ever tells me when I'm not doing well. So I appreciate you coming in and saying what's actually happening. And so it became a conversation where she sought feedback from me and the principal and from her peers, but it was a conversation, and that's what made it so powerful, that she actually wanted to get that. And we had a great working relationship because of that.
Yeah, that's a tremendous example. I would tease out very specific things that you did in that, Jethro. And so I think that you, one, identified the problem. So that's a big part of communication. You identified a very clear problem, low level questioning, yes, no, DOK1, whatever you want to call it, but you identified a problem. Then you had evidence to back it up, which people want, and it also strengthens your argument. But most importantly, you had a solution. And so that's really the crux of being candid and compassionate. The day and age of us just identifying a problem as an administrator and not providing the avenue to improve is gone. It's almost negligence or malpractice if we're going to suggest to a teacher to do something and not have the wherewithal to support them. So those three key elements built that relationship, and it also, as an administrator, set the tone. So when I hear you describe this, it's no wonder that you guys built a very strong relationship. And also, it's not artificial. We're not building a relationship on a sense that I'm hoping you do a good job. I hired you to do a good job. If you're not exactly where we need you to be, we'll support you to get there. And then if those supports aren't working, then we have to have another conversation. But so it's a great story. And I think it's evidence too that this does work. Being clear works, and it really can support people who want to do well. So I appreciate the story quite a bit.
Can I add to that too, Jethro,
Please.
that when people are confused about candor and being curt and rude, in that example that you gave, if you wouldn't have said what you were thinking and maybe you've taken the teacher down a path, and she knew something could be improved, but you didn't, and then maybe later on after you've tried to build a relationship, you point out the things that you think she needs to improve, that's what's rude. I mean, that's what's rude about the system. And if I could be just candid myself here, like what you described was two people doing their jobs well,
Right.
meaning the supervisor's in there to provide feedback and to support the teacher and to improve the teaching and learning. And the teacher's job is to try to implement new and different strategies to support students. And so kind of what we're getting at from the inside out approach that Joe and I like to tout in the book is that we can do this. We can do this. We can knuckle down as a school system, as a school, as individuals, and we can improve our schools and we can improve classrooms and we can improve our culture. But it's not going to happen if we're in a culture and nice and we're not saying what we think about stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I had a boss who was on the other end of that spectrum who said, don't be talking to people about their weekends. Talk to them about their assessment results and their scores and stuff like that. And she was like way over on the other side, like, don't have a personal relationship with people. Just talk to them about the data. And I don't think that that's a healthy approach either, because you do need to have a good working relationship with people, and it's got to be going both ways. And one of the things that you guys talk about are informal observations, things like learning walks or drop-ins or whatever you want to call them. Can you talk a little bit about how those informal observations and the feedback there does improve the conversations around the whole school?
Yeah, absolutely, Jethro. We look at those much like a teacher uses formative assessments throughout a lesson. So that is the administrator as a coach. It's real time. You're looking to offer feedback. And a lot of the times that lesson should be tied to the overall curriculum. It should be tied to, like you were saying earlier, about like the questioning. If that's been professional development throughout the year, are the teachers using the PD or blended learning? Take your pick. But that's really what we're looking for here. You're the coach. You're offering them very practical advice and feedback. And the reality is, when teachers are teaching, very often they're not even aware of some of the things they're doing. So, for example, a grave mistake a lot of math teachers at the secondary level make is called funneling. They ask the students a question. The students begin answering the problem. As they go through the problem, if they have questions, they will ask the teacher the question, and the teacher, even if they respond with a question, which is a good tactic, a lot of times that question, though, funnels them to the answer. It's not just a open-ended. So these type of walkthroughs can really start to uncover or unveil some of the weaknesses a teacher possesses that can easily be fixed through the eyes of an expert. And as long as you have that relationship, that's what we're looking to achieve and do with those pop-ins and so on. And I think done well, orchestrated well, that's where teachers will see a far amount of growth. No way will a teacher ever grow by being visited once a year through the formalized observation process. It's just impossible. I mean, if it's 45 minutes and you're in your teacher's classroom once a year, that's awful, quite frankly. We have to be in there often. There has to be a relationship, and there has to be an understanding of what we're trying to achieve with those visits. And I think as long as that's up front and clear and laid out, it usually is successful.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with someone, I don't remember who, but we basically said, if that once a year formal observation is the only time you're in a teacher's classroom, you might as well not even go in there then, because it doesn't mean anything and it's worthless at that point. So there's just no point in even doing it or ever observing that teacher if that's the approach that you're going to take. You've got to have those conversations and you've got to have those observations, not to like trap anybody, of course, but to be able to, as we've been talking about, identify the things that they can improve on that they may not be able to see themselves.
It's 100% correct, Jethro. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if the informal feedback is frequent enough and done well enough, the formal observation should be a celebration of what has happened to get there. When the timing is correct, if you time those observations throughout the year based on your teacher's needs, based on the relationship that you have, based on the number of times you'd like to go in, based on the type of informal feedback and the focus that you have for the school and the individuals, you really can see people grow to the point where the evaluation tool and the performance management system is about celebrating. I think if we went into any school, probably any business in the country, we'll find that most people don't like their performance management system and their rubric and their evaluation. So I don't see people, Joe and I do professional development around the country. We don't see too many people jumping up and down around their teacher evaluation system. But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean it can't be if our informal feedback is frequent enough and it's quality enough and it helps people grow. By the time we go in there to see them for a formal observation, we ought to be celebrating the work that they've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, another story on that, at that same school, I had another teacher who was, second or third year kindergarten teacher, and she would ask me to come do her formal observations when she was trying something new. And I was like, you do realize that no other teacher asked me to do this, right? And she said, yeah, but I mean, you're in here all the time anyway, so you might as well just like count one of these as the formal observation. And that was when I knew I was doing it right, because she understood that I had so much data on her being a great teacher that whatever was in that formal observation wasn't really going to change anything. Even if she showed that she needed great growth based on, the tool, it still wouldn't matter because we were doing such good work in other areas. And of course, she didn't need extra work. She did a brand new lesson she'd never done with kindergartners, by the way. Come on, that's amazing. and she knocked it out of the park, and it was incredible. And she made a lot of mistakes too. Like, she didn't do things right and the lesson totally fell apart, but she totally survived and was great.
Well, that's a great point too. We don't want to come off as if the walk-ins, the feedback, all of that is always built around poor performance. It's actually the
Right.
opposite. Yeah, there's no doubt that may be an element to it. But if you start observing poor performance, the administrator should actually shift gears into a different approach. What we're talking about is growth. We preach to kids and so on about having a growth mindset, and the great work that's been done from, Bandura to Seligman to Dweck to Duckworth. We love all of those great thinkers. But we find, TJ and I discuss this quite a bit, we find that we really should be getting in the mindset work among the staff and ourselves, not just the kids. That we say to the kids, you have to have a growth mindset, but really as us as educators, we want to learn and grow and embrace that mentality. And so I've learned so much from visiting classrooms, and I would like to think that I've been a value added to those teachers as well, because we're doing this in a spirit for student success.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been a great conversation. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up. TJ, I want to ask you first, what is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative leader like you?
I think it's just making sure that you're spending your time in the most important spaces in your school, and that's the classroom. Being present, being visible. It starts, Joe and I say, with the first 15 minutes of the day. Fist pump and high five every single kid, every hallway, every teacher in that first 15 minutes to be present. And then thereafter, just making sure that any single block of time you have is spent in classrooms, talking to kids, talking to teachers, providing feedback. The work is not done in an office, and it's not done getting caught up in meetings. That stuff is important, but when kids and teachers are in the building, we spend our time with them. That's what's going to transform schools. It might sound simple, but that's what leaders need to do.
All right, Joe, what is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative leader like you?
It's hard to follow that, because I agree with TJ 100%. Classroom is where it's at. I would say disrupt your day. We do get in patterns. Speak to someone tomorrow that you haven't spoken to yet this year. There's probably someone out there that needs a touch point that you haven't connected with. I would connect and just get a part of that person's life quick. And I think that's just the awesome power of being a principal. That may be a colleague, that may be a worker, that might be the crossing guard, it might be a student, but it really opens us up to other dimensions when we willingly connect with other people. And if we're talking about transformation here, we got to disrupt our days by allowing other people in. So I would say do that. Find someone you haven't seen or talked to this year or haven't talked to this year. Start a conversation, see how their year's going, and build from there.
Yeah, I think that is great advice. And people can connect with you by going to the schoolhouse302.com and then also look for the Candid and Compassionate Feedback book wherever you buy books at, because it's probably there. Just want to thank you both so much for being part of Transformative Principal. And thank you all who are listening. And you can follow Joe Jones at Joseph Jones Sr. on Twitter. And TJ is at TJ Vari on Twitter. Thanks again, guys, so much for being part of Transformative Principal.
Thanks, Jethro.
Thank you.